Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our Controller's Corner session. My name is Lonnie, and I am a business solutions consultant here at CRGroup and work with our GP clients to really help them optimize their use of Dynamics GP. We have designed this series of free webinars to help Dynamics users take their GP really to the next level. And as we get closer to the end of the year, many of you will be getting ready to close your fiscal year, as many of our clients do operate on a calendar year cycle. So today's session is dedicated to walking through the best practice processing for closing your fiscal year in Dynamics GP. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. Today's presentation will be recorded and it will be available on demand later this week on the Controller's Corner page on the CRGroup website. Also, I encourage you to ask questions, so please feel free to submit them in the GoToWebinar panel, and I will do my best to get to them at the end of today's presentation. Finally, this session counts for a half hour of continuing professional development hours, and we will email an individual certificate to all attendees this week. So the key items we're going to cover today are why and when we need to close our fiscal year in GP, how we close, the subledger information and the benefits of doing so, some important notes for those using analytical accounting, and finally, the steps we should take and how we close the fiscal year when the time comes. And we'll also show a brief demonstration of some of these items in today's webinar. So at the end of the fiscal year, we need to be able to zero out our profit and loss accounts and roll the balances up into our retained earnings account. The system knows which accounts to close to retained earnings by the posting type selected for accounts when they're created in GP. So it is recommended that you validate that all of your accounts are set up with the correct posting type. And I'm going to show you the best way to handle this during our demonstration today. In addition to P&L accounts being closed to our retained earnings, closing the fiscal year in Dynamics GP also pushes opening balances for your balance sheet accounts into the subsequent fiscal period. And finally, while closing all individual subledgers is not a required exercise, many of the subledgers in GP have some date-sensitive and year-to-date information that should be reset each year. And in order to do that, we need to close those subledgers. And this would include modules like payroll, inventory, receivables, payables, and of course, fixed assets. So a common misconception among clients is that you can't close your fiscal year until your audit is complete. And I'm sure it is true, most of the people on the call today, that your audit doesn't happen until months after your fiscal year end is completed. In the meantime, you have other periods in the subsequent year that transactions will need to be posted for, not to mention month-end closing processes and reconciliations for those periods that you still need to complete. And you can only do this if your balance sheet accounts have proper opening balances, which will only appear when the prior year is closed. The good news is you don't have to wait until your audit is complete to close the fiscal year, because Dynamics GP allows you to post entries back one historical year, so that adjusting entries can be posted at a later time if needed. So that means you can close your fiscal year as soon as all of the following steps are completed. First and foremost, you want to ensure that all your subledger information is complete, meaning that all invoices have been entered into accounts payable or all goods have been received, all customer invoices have been issued and posted, all fixed assets have been added and depreciated for the period, bank entries have been posted, and checkbooks reconciled. Once each subledger is completed, they should be closed to reset those year-to-date information fields I mentioned previously. Next, you'll want to complete any month-end or year-end general journal entries, which could include prepaid allocations and accruals for transactions that didn't arrive in time to make it to the subledger for the fiscal year close. Once all of your pre-audit adjustments are complete and you have produced preliminary statements and trial balances for your auditors, you can now close the fiscal year. Don't worry, as I mentioned, you can post back into GP to one historical year, so all of your audit adjustments can still be posted to that closed year. You would input your entry exactly the same way you would any journal entry. And when you post the transaction, you'll notice on the journal entry report that the system automatically creates some additional lines. This is to either adjust your retained earnings account to close out the amounts posted to a P&L account, or to adjust the opening balance of any balance sheet accounts that may be part of the entry. In addition, even though GP will only allow you to post entries to one historical year, in GP version 2013 R2, Microsoft introduced a new feature that allows you to reopen a closed year so that you can make adjustments to prior years as well. This feature is also available on all the versions issued since, which include GP 2015, 2015 R2, 2016, 2016 R2, and the up-and-coming 2018. If you're using analytical accounting, it is really important to note that there are some additional components required to that. So before closing your fiscal year, I would highly encourage everyone to contact our support team at mbssupport@crgroup.com to make arrangements to have us assist you with closing the analytical accounting side, because there are some scripts that have to be run, so our team will assist you with that prior to your closing. So these are some of the steps that you should include when you're closing your fiscal year. First and foremost, ensuring all your subledger transactions are posted and month-end closing procedures such as reconciliations are completed. Any final adjustments or adjusting entries prior to your audit should be posted to the general ledger. One of the most common support calls we receive during the year-end closing process for clients is that a P&L account did not close out to retained earnings correctly. In each case, this is due to the fact that the account was set up with an incorrect posting type. So to avoid this, we're going to show you how you can use SmartList to validate the both posting types. You'll want to print a complete trial balance report for the full year so you can make sure after the closing that the results are the same for your opening balances moving forward into your subsequent year. You'll want to print your year-end financial statements for a picture of what things looked like at that point in time. In the fiscal period setup window, you will need to open a new fiscal year for the coming reporting year. And you will absolutely want to ensure that your IT team takes a backup of the database prior to closing the fiscal year. And then finally, you can go ahead and close. It sounds like a long list, but it's really not. These are all things you're doing on a monthly basis anyways. So let's dive in and take a look at what is happening in this process. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my GP environment here. And the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is how we close our subledgers. So again, as mentioned, before you close your subledgers, you want to make sure that all the transactions have been posted for that subledger and that you've reconciled the subledger to the general ledger. So we should really only be closing this once it's complete. If your fiscal year and calendar year are different, you can choose to close them separately, as you'll see in here that you can do a fiscal and a calendar. If they're the same, then you can simply choose all, and it's all going to look the same anyways. At this point, once we've created this, we click Close Year. And what this is ultimately doing is through some of these vendor inquiry windows that we have available, you'll see there's a year-to-date, a last year, and a life-to-date field. So this is actually shifting the information from these columns that are date-sensitive into the appropriate areas. So the year-to-date would essentially be zeroed out because we're now going to be starting a new year. Your last year would shift to whatever year we just closed, and that year's total would be added to your life-to-date. So all of these date-sensitive fields are then modified when we close your year. If you never closed your year in the subledger, likely all of this information looks the same. So predominantly your life-to-date and year-to-date will look like the same number. So this is a good practice. If you use some of these inquiries, we recommend that you do that. And this is also true of your customer side. So in terms of sales, you would have the same process under routines for year-end close there. One of the more important subledgers to ensure are closed is your fixed assets. It actually does have to be closed before you can enter assets into the subsequent year. So if we go ahead into our financial module and we go down to our fixed assets area down here in routines, we'll see that there is a year-end function down here. And it's a really simple process. You would essentially move the book that you want to close, and you can do all of them simultaneously if you have more than one book. Most of our clients only have one, so once you've moved it into this area, you would go ahead and click Continue. And what this is going to do, again, is from a date-sensitive perspective, it's going to zero out the year-to-date depreciation fields in your books for your assets, and obviously update your life-to-date. so that you can start depreciating again in your subsequent year and adding additional assets as needed. Once you've closed the subledger, I would suggest ensuring that you close the fiscal period for that module to ensure that no additional entries are made to the subledgers inadvertently. And what I mean by that is under our setups, we will see a fiscal periods window. And in here, you can actually close individual modules one by one. So as you enter your subledgers and reconcile them and close them, I would recommend coming in here, closing those subledgers so that people aren't posting anything there inadvertently. And that can be done individually with certain sections and subledgers as you work through the process of closing your fiscal year. So as I mentioned earlier, most of the time when you're adding GL accounts to your chart, you're doing them on the fly. You need a new account, you go in, you add it, and sometimes this can result in small details being missed. And while this seems inconsequential at the time, when it comes time to close your year end, it would have a significant impact. And what I mean by that is GP uses within the account setup a posting type. And this is used to determine what accounts are closed to retained earnings, being your profit loss, and which of those accounts will have a carry forward opening balance into your subsequent year, being your balance sheet. And a good practice is to use SmartList to validate that all your accounts are set up correctly. So most of the time, if you're using a chart of accounts structure as it's recommended by CRG, your accounts are usually grouped numerically in terms of base account, being your 1,000s or 1 start with assets, 2 liabilities, 3 equity, 4 revenue, and then 5 onward is your expenses. And so using this methodology, there's an easy way using SmartList that we can actually validate that all of your accounts are set up correctly. So I've actually set up a SmartList favorite in here, and I would recommend doing the same. So this is quick and easy for you to do at the end of every year. But essentially all you have to do in here is we need to set some search criteria, and we can then pick the columns that we want in here. This is a really easy report to build. So in here I can just remove anything that I don't really need. And what I'm really looking for is this posting type. And I also am going to add my base account in here, my natural account, because this is going to allow me to set some parameters around this. So I'm going to choose my main account segment, which is my natural. And so when I set up my search parameters, I'm going to ask the system to tell me what accounts have a posting type equal to balance sheet or profit loss. I can choose either or. But they have a main account number that is in the 4,000 to 5,000 or 1,000 to 3,000 range, depending on which way I'm looking at this. So this allows me to take a look if any of my accounts are set up incorrectly. So I'm going to say is between, and in this case I'm using profit loss, so I'm going to range this from 1,000 to 3,999. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have these specific accounts, but we want to pick up everything in between there and see, does anything that ranges in this balance sheet range actually being tied to a profit loss posting type. And so if I click OK and I run that, I can see it comes up blank. So I know in this case I do not have any balance sheet accounts that are or any profit loss accounts that are incorrectly assigned a posting type of balance sheet. So this helps me to validate that all my accounts are set up correctly to ensure that my P&L accounts are going to close out to retain earnings correctly and that my balance sheets are going to move forward. And again, I can go in and do the flip of this to make sure that there are no balance sheet accounts that are set up on the P&L. So I can go here and I can change my search settings and range this. And I see there are some in here that I will definitely have to validate. So most of these are unit accounts, so that's okay. I don't need to worry too much about that. But I do have some revenue accounts down here that are incorrectly posted as balance sheet types. So I may want to look into those and make some adjustments. And I can do that directly from the SmartList itself. So my rent expense is set up incorrectly. So if I just double click on that, I can open it up. Oh, and that's an allocation account, so that's actually okay. So this is just for me to make sure I'm looking at these items, make sure that they're set up correctly, and to ensure that they're closing out to the correct type in terms of when we close our fiscal year end. So I would recommend saving these reports as a favorite. I would click on the favorites and I give it a name, and I would call this profit loss validation. And I can just add that to my favorites list. And when I navigate over here, now I have that list there. So come next year, I can just simply run the report and validate that my accounts are in fact correct. So once you've completed all of the steps that were discussed and your IT team has taken a backup of your GP database, you can actually go ahead and close the fiscal year. So a couple of things to note when you close the year. So we're going to go ahead into our, I'm going to open that up. So a couple things, users cannot be in GP while the year-end process is being run. So typically speaking, what we suggest is you take your backup sort of the end of the day when processing is complete, and all users are then logged out of the system, and you go ahead and run your year-end close process sort of at the end of the day and let it run through. You want to make sure that your retained earnings account is in fact correct as it's set up in here. If it's not, then we'll need to fix that in your financial setup. And again, that's an easy fix for anybody who has access to the setup components within GP. If you check the remove unused segments numbers box, this would basically, any unused segments that may have been created inadvertently but were never used can be deleted. So you don't cloud up all of your segments with useless information that you're not actually going to be using down the road. And if you like to keep all inactive accounts or those with budgets tied to them, you can say this maintain inactive accounts and choose all or with budget amounts, so that if there are accounts that have budgets tied to them that aren't necessarily used for expensing but budget reporting only, you can do that here. And once you've completed this sort of section, you can click Close Year, and the progress bar will move along so you can see the status of the closing. Depending on your business volume of accounts and transactions, the closing process can take up to a couple of hours, really depending on your organization. So, which is why we say sometimes waiting till the end of the day, take your backup and let it run through the evening so that it's not disturbing your work hours is usually a good practice. Once the process has completed, a journal entry report will automatically generate. And I would suggest printing or saving as a PDF so that you can validate the results. The journal entry should tie out to the income loss of your income statement, so you'll see a line for that. You'll also want to print a new trial balance report for the closed year and the new fiscal year you just opened to ensure that your balances are correct between them in terms of what your opening balances are for your balance sheet, and obviously validating that your P&L balances have all zeroed out. If there are any reconciliation differences, then we would suggest restoring your backup, and we'll take a look and contact us at support, and we can take a look to see maybe what's causing the issue. Could be a blip during the closing process, which means you can restore the backup and rerun. But it could be something else, so it's always encouraged that you contact our support team to help you out if you run into any snags. Please note that it's very, very important that no entries or work are done in the system until all reports and data are verified. Because if there are any issues and you have to restore the backup, any data that you entered into the system after that backup is lost. So you have to then replicate all of that work created. So highly suggest make sure you validate all your results, everything looks clean, looks complete before you let your users back into GP to continue processing transactions moving forward. So that's how easy it is to close your fiscal year. And when your year is closed, you will have the ability to enter journal entries to prior historical years, the exact same way you enter them now. And the system, as I mentioned, will create those additional lines for closing out your retained earnings or adjusting your opening balances for your balance sheet accounts. So that sort of concludes our session in terms of your year-end closing process and sort of best practices to prepare for your fiscal year-end close. I'm going to just turn my attention to the question panels to see if there are any specific questions from any of you out there attending the session today. So I'll just take a second here and we'll see what questions may have been generated. So one question asked is related to posting back further historical years. So as I mentioned earlier, the system does have a feature now if you're using any of the versions issued from GP 2013 R2 beyond. You can actually open or reverse a close so that if you need to go back to 2 years, you would basically open up last year and then go back and post your adjusting entries to the year before and then close your year again. And again, it's a pretty easy function to use. Essentially, the way it works is under your year-end closing functionality, you'll see this reverse historical year. And you'll see the year that was last closed, so you'll know what year you're opening in that case. So from that perspective, that's how you could then go back to prior years beyond that first year. And if you have to go even further back, you can reverse even more years, going back, opening up, say, 2 historical years or 3 historical years, or as many as you may need to process your adjusting entries and then reclose those years again. So that looks to be all the questions that I have currently in the panel. With that said, I would like to take an opportunity to thank you all for joining us today in today's year-end closing webinar. I hope you found the information of this session helpful and will help you get your year-end closed effectively and efficiently this year. A reminder that you will receive a certificate this week to mark your professional credit hours, which is the half hour valid for this session. Also, if you haven't already, if you've missed out on any of our Controller Corners sessions, you can catch them on demand on our website. And we have one final session coming up for creating the ultimate GL, which I would highly encourage everybody to tune into. It's a great session and it always gains wide popularity amongst our clients. Finally, a survey should appear after the webinar today, so please take a moment to provide your feedback so that we can keep working to improve these sessions in the future and in the coming year. And thank you again. Please feel free to reach out to anyone on the team here. If we can assist you in getting more from your Dynamics GP system, we'd love to help you. So thanks again, everybody, and have a wonderful day.